Snowflakes were still clinging to my parka when Carl Henley laughed loud enough for the whole diner to hear, said the slim gun cleaner wouldn't hit a barn door. Names Lena Porter, 27, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with cinnamon rolls clung to my gloves as I set down my battered tool bag. Ever had someone underestimate you so badly, you almost thanked them for it? Snowflakes drifted lazily down over Main Street as Lena Porter pushed open the door to Marge's place, the diner that smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls. She had no idea that by the end of the month, her name would be spoken with both respect and surprise. Inside, the warm air wrapped around her like an old quilt. The windows were fogged from the heat, glowing faintly from the Christmas lights strung across the street. The low hum of conversation floated above the hiss of the coffee maker and the soft scrape of forks against plates. At one corner table, two men in flannel jackets were bent over a map of hunting trails, while an elderly couple shared a slice of cherry pie at the counter. The Winter Marksman charity shoot was on everyone's tongue. Between bites of pie and sips of coffee, the regulars traded predictions as if they were calling the weather. The names tossed around were the same as always: Ed Travers, Walt Graham, maybe young Pete if he could steady his nerves. Not a single voice suggested Lena. She slid into her usual booth by the window, brushing a few snowflakes from her dark hair. Marge Ellis spotted her from behind the counter and poured a steaming mug without asking. "Cold morning out there," Marge said, as she set it down, the aroma of strong coffee drifting upward. "You warm up, hon. I'll get you a plate." Across the room, Carl Henley leaned back in his chair, his voice carrying easily over the chatter. "That slim gun cleaner couldn't hit a barn door if she tried," he said, his grin sharp enough to cut. The men around him chuckled, a few shaking their heads in agreement. Carl tapped his finger on the table for emphasis, clearly enjoying the attention. From the next table, Evelyn Brooks glanced up from her tea. "Steady hands can surprise you," she said mildly, her eyes on Lena for just a moment before returning to her cup. Her tone was light, but it stilled the laughter for a beat. Carl only smirked and shrugged. Marge returned with a plate of eggs and rye toast, sliding it in front of Lena. "On the house," she said in a low voice, the corner of her mouth lifting. Lena murmured thanks, feeling the heat of quiet support. She could feel Carl's gaze from across the room, a kind of measuring look, but she didn't give him the satisfaction of glancing back. The bell over the door rang as someone left, letting in a gust of cold air. Lena ate slowly, listening without meaning to. The conversation at Carl's table had circled back to the charity shoot. He made a half-serious bet with another shooter, Walt, that she wouldn't so much as touch a rifle during the event. Walt laughed and said he'd take that bet, but only for the fun of it. Marge bustled past with a tray, the scent of cinnamon rolls trailing after her. Evelyn caught Lena's eye again, offering a small, knowing smile before turning to refill her tea. The smile was brief, but it warmed Lena more than the coffee. When she was done, Lena stood pulling on her coat, while the floor mat gave a soft squeak under her boots. She dropped a bill on the counter out of habit, even though Marge had insisted the meal was on her, and adjusted her scarf against the cold waiting outside. As she stepped toward the door, Carl's voice followed her. "She'll never be on that firing line." She didn't turn around, but her gaze flicked toward the event poster pinned to the wall near the door. A snowy target beneath bold red letters announcing the Winter Marksman Charity Shoot. The paper rustled faintly in the warm draft from the heater as she reached for the door, and she let her eyes rest on it a moment longer before stepping out into the snow. The sharp scent of gun oil and the quiet creak of the workshop door greeted Lena as she stepped inside the Everpine Gun Club just after sunrise. The cold clung to her coat until the hum of the space heaters began to ease it from her shoulders. Frosted windows along the south wall blurred the pale sunlight into soft strips across the concrete floor. Somewhere downrange, a single shot cracked the sound muffled by insulation and distance. Lena hung her scarf on a hook, pulled her hair into a loose knot, and crossed to the rack of rifles waiting for her attention. Carl's bet at the diner drifted through her thoughts like smoke, but she hummed softly under her breath as she checked the day's practice schedule. The names, times, and lanes were laid out in her neat handwriting from the week before. She set a rifle on the bench, unscrewed the scope, and began her slow, careful work. Each movement was practiced, swabbing the barrel, oiling the slide, adjusting the scope with tiny clicks until it sat perfectly aligned. Outside, the scrape of boots on ice cut through the quiet. She glanced up through the narrow window just in time to see Carl step onto a slick patch of pavement. His foot slid, his arms jerked out to steady himself, and he caught the doorframe with a grunt. Without a word, he disappeared inside toward the range. Lena set down the scope, stepped outside into the bite of the morning air, and grabbed a bag of rock salt from the corner bin. She sprinkled it evenly along the walkway, the granules clicking against the ice until the patch was safe again. When she came back in, Evelyn Brooks was there brushing snowflakes from her coat. In her hands was a foil-wrapped apple pie. "Thought Marge could use a spare for the church bazaar," she said, setting it on the counter. She stayed leaning lightly on the edge while Lena resumed her work. "They've nearly finished the lights on Main Street," Evelyn said, her breath still holding a chill. "Tree lighting's Friday night. And you know the charity shoot will pack this place on Saturday." "I expect so," Lena replied, not looking up from the rifle she was cleaning. She tightened a screw, checked the alignment again. The faint scent of cinnamon drifted from the pie as Evelyn settled in a chair nearby. Ed Morales came in, stamping his boots, his mailbag slung over one shoulder. He blew on his hands and cradled them around a coffee thermos before speaking. "Morning, Lena. Say you think you'll be on the roster this weekend." She smiled faintly. "Just here to keep everyone else's gear in shape." Evelyn arched an eyebrow at that, her lips curving, as if she didn't quite believe it. A few minutes later, Carl returned from the target lanes carrying his rifle. He rested it on the bench, peered through the scope, then tested it with a few dry clicks. "Scope's dead on," he muttered. "Guess even a cleaner can get lucky." The words rode the line between mockery and a flicker of reluctant respect, and he didn't wait for her reaction before turning back toward the range. The room settled into its usual rhythm, Ed sorting mail at the counter, Evelyn chatting idly about the bazaar, the heaters humming low. The scent of gun oil mixed with coffee creating a strange but familiar comfort. The door swung open again, letting in a gust of cold and a flurry of snow. Walt Garner, the event coordinator, stepped in and brushed off his shoulders. "Morning, folks," he called. "Might be short a shooter this year." Evelyn's gaze shifted toward Lena, and in the quiet beat that followed, their eyes met with a glance that said more than words. The wind had a sharp edge that afternoon, and Lena heard the telltale scrape and thud of boots losing their grip on the icy back lot. She had just stepped outside with her small canvas toolkit to check a rattling hinge on the side door. Light snow sifted through the air, the kind that made the world feel hushed, and the row of trucks along the fence wore a thin crust of white on their hoods. From beyond the corner of the building came a muffled exclamation, half breath, half warning, and then the hollow clatter of a case sliding across ice. The church bells on Church Street counted the hour with a far, steady peal, as if the town itself were taking note. Lena rounded the corner and saw Carl arms overloaded with an ammo box and a rifle case moving too quick for the slick ground. One foot shot forward, the other twisted, and his weight pitched. The case skated away toward a snowbank like a wayward sled. His jaw clenched, his shoulders hunched against the inevitable. She dropped the toolkit without thinking. In 2 quick steps, she had a hand on his sleeve, steadying the sudden tilt, and she stretched her boot across the ice to catch the runaway case before the latch met the drift. The soles of her boots whispered against the frozen crust. For a breath, they stood locked in place, his weight leaning into her grip, hers balanced between him and the rescued case, while the wind lifted a few grains of powdery snow and set them wandering. "You've got it," she said low, and even as if coaxing a nervous horse. She shifted her footing, gave his arm a firm squeeze, and together they found a patch of gritty traction where salt from earlier had bitten through the glaze. At the side door, Evelyn stood half in, half out, the knit scarf at her neck fluffed by the breeze. She didn't call out. She just watched with a faint, approving smile, the kind that respected quiet competence more than speeches. Ed Morales came along the alley at the same time, a brown package tucked under one arm, his cap pulled low against the cold. He paused when he took in the tableau and lifted his chin in greeting. Lena bent, scooped up her toolkit by the worn leather handle, and with her free hand hefted the rifle case from where her boot had pinned it. She carried it to the bench by the fence, one of those rough plank seats the club kept around for smokers, and set it gently on the driest spot. From her bag, she pulled a folded cloth and draped it over the latches, shielding the metal from the wet snow. Only then did she look Carl over, practical as a nurse. "You okay?" His jaw stayed tight, but some of the stiffness left his shoulders. "Fine," he muttered. "Just stepped wrong." The words were clipped by embarrassment, and his breath made small clouds in the cold. Ed's grin showed a flash of warmth. "Hazard pay for the lady," he said, tugging his cap. "That save just cost you a cup of coffee at least." Carl huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. He glanced at the bench, at the neatly covered case, then back at Lena as if seeing her with a slightly different lens. The wind shivered the little icicles along the eaves. From the range inside came the faintest thunk as someone reset a target. "Walk you to the truck?" Lena asked, her tone as neutral as the gray sky. He hesitated, the old instinct to wave off help battling the new knowledge of how close he'd come to trouble. "Sure," he said finally. He shifted the ammo box to a better grip and fell into step beside her. They took it slow, heel-toe, the way you do when the world is trying to skate out from under you. Their shoulders didn't touch, but the space between them felt companionable rather than wary. Lena pointed out a darker patch where melt had refrozen into a clear pane. Carl adjusted his path without comment. Ed, satisfied all was steady, continued toward the front door, with his parcel whistling tunelessly. Evelyn, still in the doorway, let the door rest a little wider open, so the hallway's warm air brushed the threshold. By the time they reached Carl's truck, color had warmed his face from the effort and the cold. He set the ammo box on the floorboard and turned back for the case. Lena had already lifted it from the bench and carried it over the protective cloth still in place like a small courtesy. She held the case while he cleared a spot, then passed it into his hands with a simple nod. He didn't pull away at once. Instead, he let his fingers rest a heartbeat longer than necessary on the handle she offered, as if acknowledging the transfer was about more than gear. "Thanks," he said, eyes on the latch he pretended to check. "Could have been a mess." It wasn't, she answered, not making more of it than that. Her breath drifted in front of her and vanished. For a moment, neither spoke. The town beyond the fence moved at its winter pace, a delivery truck rumbling along Main, a dog barking once and then thinking better of it, the bells now quiet between hours. The snow kept up its soft, steady fall, knitting a fresh film over the places their boots had scuffed. Carl shut the door with care, then looked at her directly. Some of the old sharpness had drained from his gaze, leaving something more human, more uncertain. He opened his mouth shut, it then settled on a small, awkward nod. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it wasn't nothing. "Salt held up," Lena said, gesturing with her chin toward the safer strip near the door. "I'll lay down more before dusk." He followed her look, then back again. Good idea. Another pause, another half-formed sentence he let go. He tapped his glove against the truck's fender as if to knock the ice from his knuckles, and the sound was soft and hollow. They moved together for the last few steps, his gait still cautious, hers naturally measured, until the end of the row, where the ice gave way to gritty gravel. There, without ceremony, the pull between them eased. He didn't turn away fast. He let her step clear first. An unspoken courtesy returned for the one she had given. Evelyn's smile widened just enough to show she had filed this down as a turning point. Ed, now inside, held the door a second longer than necessary, so Lena wouldn't have to touch the cold metal handle. She gave him a grateful glance and tucked the cloth back into her bag, careful to shake off the clinging flakes before folding it. The air bit a little harder as the light shifted toward late afternoon. Lena cinched her scarf and lifted the toolkit once more. "Take it easy," she said to Carl, matter-of-fact. He cleared his throat. "You too." She started back toward the side door, her steps careful over the places she hadn't salted yet. Behind her, the truck's engine ticked as it cooled, and the frost on the windshield began to bloom again where his sleeve had smudged it. He stood there a moment longer, watching her cross the slick and step up onto the safer patch she'd made for everyone else. As Lena heads back inside, Carl watches her, then glances at the charity shoot flyer pinned to his truck's dashboard. Strings of warm bulbs crisscrossed the snow-packed range, and the smell of peppermint bark and hot cocoa drifted through the cold air as neighbors arrived bundled in scarves and mittens. Carl's silent glance at the charity shoot flyer resurfaces in his mind as he takes in the festive scene, still wrestling with whether Lena belongs on that firing line. He moved along the edge of the crowd with his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, the slight limp from Tuesday's mishap making his pace careful. Children in reindeer hats tugged at their parents to see the raffle table. A brass band of retirees eased into Silver Bells, the trombone a hair flat, before settling in tune. Steam curled from cocoa cups. The sound system gave a gentle pop as someone tapped the microphone and laughed at themselves. The range, usually spare and practical, wore a holiday face, quilted raffle jars labeled PIS and quilts, and gift baskets lined up beside stacks of homemade cookies wrapped in red cellophane. Lena threaded quietly through the lanes in her thick parka knit hat, pulled low, gloves snug at the wrist. She paused to check a target frame, then a second, the way you check a porch step before an elder steps on it. Evelyn floated at her shoulder from time to time, with a silver thermos making introductions to folks from outside the club. "This is Lena Porter," she'd say, warm as a church greeter. "She keeps the wheels from squeaking around here." Marge, meanwhile, ran the cocoa booth like a band leader, calling hello to newcomers, tapping the tip jar with a spoon in rhythm with the music, and handing an extra marshmallow to a bashful boy who'd lost his mitten. Walt Garner climbed onto the plywood stage and raised a hand for quiet. "Evening Everpine," he called, voice friendly and practiced. "Thank you for braving the cold. Tonight's Winter Marksman charity shoot supports heating oil assistance for our seniors. No one should greet a winter morning with an empty tank." The band let the last chord of Silver Bells fade as the crowd answered with mittened applause and a few whoops from the back. Walt nodded toward the donation table and thanked the church ladies for the quilt they'd donated, drawing an affectionate cheer from their row. Lena's work kept her moving. Near lane 3, she noticed a veteran whose gloves were thin at the fingers, the knuckles red from the cold. She palmed a pair of disposable hand warmers from her pocket and offered them wordlessly. He blinked in pleasant surprise, nodded once, and slipped them into his gloves with a soft, "Much obliged." She didn't stay for thanks. She had a list in her head to finish before the program began. At lane 5, a jittery shooter frowned at his scope, twisting the ring too loosely. Lena asked if she might take a look. With small, sure motions, she tightened the mount, centered the reticle, then stepped back so he could own his place again. The people gathered at the rail murmured, the tone shifting from idle curiosity to something like respect. Carl, watching from 3 paces off, felt the pinch of his earlier words and rubbed the bridge of his nose as if he could wipe the memory away. Snow fell at an unhurried pace, the flakes light enough to spiral in the beam of the floodlights. A pair of teenagers tried to capture their breath in photos and dissolved into giggles. Evelyn pressed her thermos into Lena's glove for a single sip, then sealed it again and swung off to greet a late-arriving couple from Church Street. Walt stood at the infield, conferring with the safety volunteers, brows drawn tight. From where Lena was, it looked like numbers on a clipboard weren't adding up. Evelyn drifted back, reading the concern in Walt's face. "Missing someone?" she asked under her breath. Walt grimaced. "Still 1 slot shy. Flu's making the rounds." Evelyn tipped her head toward Lena, who was kneeling to check a wobbly stand. "You've already got steady hands here." Marge, overhearing as she ladled cocoa, lifted her chin and chimed in across the space. "If you want reliable, I can point you there." The comment rippled outward, catching on curious ears. Before Walt could answer, a playful gust shouldered through the lanes, mischievous as a child, and jarred 2 target frames out of square. One listed left its hinge whining. The other shrugged a crossbar loose. A collective "Oh!" rose from the rail. Lena was already moving. She jogged downrange with a compact tool roll, dropped to 1 knee in the snow, and went to work. A wrench here, a tightened wingnut there, a small lift to reseat the crossbar, her breath steady, her motions tidy and quick. The band, seeing the crowd's attention tilted that way, vamped a soft verse to fill the air while she finished. When the frames stood true again, Lena brushed snow from her knees and jogged back up the lane, cheeks, pink hat, dusted white. Applause broke out, without prompting, first from the rail, then swelling across the crowd, until even the teenagers clapped their phone cameras, forgotten for a beat. The sound startled her, then made her smile in that shy way of someone who prefers the backstage. She slid the tool roll back into her pocket and glanced instinctively for the next small problem to fix. Carl felt something unclench. The image that kept returning, the way she had steadied him on the ice, the way her boot had pinned the skidding case, braided with this one, her straightening the frames, so strangers could enjoy a clean, fair night. He shifted his weight and found the limp no longer the only thing making him careful. Somewhere in the warmth of the crowd's approval, he recognized the simple fairness of it. Walt cleared his throat, stepped toward the plywood stage, and lifted the microphone. The bulbs strung above him swung lightly, making halos on the snow. He scanned the roster again, then looked out over the faces, neighbors bundled in wool, elders, arm in arm, kids with chocolate mustaches from cocoa. Marge stilled her ladle. Evelyn rested a hand on Lena's sleeve, a touch of steady encouragement. The band let its chord fade into the hush. Walt steps to the microphone. "If Ms. Porter is willing, we'd be honored to have her complete the roster." All eyes turned toward Lena. The crowd's chatter softened into a respectful hush as Lena stepped up to lane 7, the string lights swaying gently in the winter breeze. Marge's earlier comment, "Don't underestimate steady hands," echoed in her mind as she planted her boots and adjusted her stance. She inhaled the faint mingling scent of cocoa, and wood smoke exhaled slow and let the quiet settle over her. Snowflakes spiraled through the golden light above each one, drifting lazily before landing on the packed white ground. Somewhere off to the side, the brass band tested a few notes, the sound warm but tentative, like it didn't want to intrude. A safety officer stood nearby, stamping his feet to keep warm, rubbing his gloved hands together. Lena glanced at him, then reached into her pocket and pressed a small heat pack into his palm. His eyes widened in surprise before he tucked it into his glove with a grateful nod. She smiled faintly and turned back to the lane. The first shot came after a long moment of stillness. Lena raised the rifle, sighted in with calm precision, and squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack echoed against the snowbank beyond the targets. A neat hole appeared dead center in the bullseye. There was a brief low murmur from the crowd, a rustle of surprise like someone had opened an unexpected gift. Without glancing at them, she chambered the next round. This time her focus narrowed further. She let the sound of boots shifting on snow fade from her awareness. The second shot landed so close to the first that the two holes nearly touched. A few onlookers leaned forward, squinting to be sure there were indeed two marks. The wind picked up just then, rattling the light strings overhead and sending a scatter of snowflakes across the range. Lena didn't fight it. She waited patient and unhurried, feeling the breeze ease before settling her aim once more. The third shot rang out, crisp and certain, punching the target dead center, as if the rifle and her hands were one piece of machinery. For a breath, there was silence. Then the applause broke like a thaw, first scattered claps, then cheers swelling from the cocoa stand to the far end of the rail. Carl unfolded his arms slowly, a measured breath escaping him, and in its place came a look tinged with reluctant pride. Evelyn's hands came together with brisk, enthusiastic claps, her eyes bright in the glow of the lights. Walt checked the score sheet, his face lifting with the kind of news worth sharing. That perfect string he called into the microphone just pushed us past but the matching funds threshold for the heating oil program. A cheer rose that was less about marksmanship and more about the warmth that would reach every home on their list. The night in that moment felt suddenly bigger than the competition. The next morning, the diner windows steamed against the frosty air outside as townsfolk lingered over coffee refills and fresh-baked pie. Carl's earlier dismissive bet hung in the air like a faint echo, but now he was sitting across from Lena's booth, his hat in his hands, his voice low and earnest. "I was wrong," he said, not bothering to hide it from the room. "About your aim. About you." Lena shook her head, brushing it aside with a small smile. It was for the cause, she said, her gaze drifting to the photo of the smiling brass band on the bulletin board. "That's what matters." Walt stopped by clipboard tucked under one arm and tapped the freshly posted sign beside the coffee machine. $20 raised. Heating oil fund, goal exceeded. A cheer rolled through the room. Someone at the counter clinked their mug against a neighbor's in quiet celebration. Carl leaned back, clearing his throat. "That night on the ice," he said, "when you caught me, could have let me go down. Didn't. Guess that told me more than any target ever could." Evelyn, seated at the next booth, grinned wide. "Sounds like someone's ready for dessert," she teased. "Humble pie." Carl. Without missing a beat, Marge appeared with a warm slice, setting it in front of him to a round of laughter. The chatter softened into the comfortable hum of Sunday morning. Carl stood clearing his throat again and announced for all to hear, "I'd like to formally nominate Lena Porter for full club membership, and I'll be the first to offer mentorship hours." A ripple of approving nods followed, joined by a smattering of applause. On the bulletin board, Marge tacked up a fresh flyer winter skills clinic, hosted by Lena Porter. A little girl by the door tugged her grandmother's sleeve, eyes bright. "Can we go?" she whispered. The diner bell jingled as someone stepped in from the snowy street, bringing with them a gust of cold air that quickly gave way to the scent of cinnamon and coffee. Inside, mugs clinked, voices mingled, and the warmth spread quietly, the kind that came from more than just the heat. The snowfall in Everpine seemed softer that morning, as if the whole town had exhaled together after a night of warmth and goodwill. Carl's respect, hard-won through small moments of grace, had replaced the doubt that once lingered, and Lena's quiet skill had become a point of pride for everyone. In the end, it was never about the perfect shot. It was about the steady hands that reached out without hesitation when someone was about to fall. Kindness given freely has a way of circling back to us, often carrying more light than we ever imagined. And perhaps somewhere in your own street or kitchen table, a simple gesture today could be the ember that keeps another heart warm tomorrow.